Good morning, everyone. My name's Gareth Forber. I work for LMC International here based in the UK. I'm very sorry that I can't join you in person at the event today, but I hope you have a fantastic conference, and I hope to join you in person some point in the near future. I've been asked today to give an overview of the current situation in the world sugar market and talk about some of the factors that will influence the outlook. Hopefully, my brief introduction will sort of set the scene for some of the more detailed discussions that you'll and presentations that you'll have during the course of the event. So, if you could just bear with me one moment while I share my screen, then we can get started. So, the world sugar market, what's the current situation and outlook? I thought I'd start by just looking at what's the story so far in 2022. If we look at this first chart, the chart on the left-hand side shows what's happened to number 11 sugar prices over the last year or so. And as I think many of you will know, sugar has been firmly stuck in a range somewhere between 17.4 and 20.4 cents per pound for over a year now. Now, this has happened at a time when oil and grain prices have rallied very strongly before coming back down again, and also at a time when white sugar prices have been rising, driven by the white premium, which has risen to extremely high levels due to supply side constraints and also strong demand. But despite strength in oil and grains in white sugar, raw sugar has been firmly stuck in its range. What has been holding raw sugar back? Well, there's been a couple of factors. The first one is sugar fundamentals. India has produced and exported far more sugar than we imagined over the course of the last year. If we look at the chart on the left-hand side, it shows the evolution of estimates of Indian sugar production and exports over the last year. So at the beginning of the crop back in November, expectations were for 32 million tons of sugar and 7 million tons of exports. In the end, it turned out that the crop was 36 million tons of sugar and more like 11 million tons of exports. It clearly has had an impact on the market. On top of that, we've got politics and policy in Brazil also influencing the market. Brazil's the world sugar market is influenced by oil via Brazil's biofuel market. And normally we see a situation where fuel prices in Brazil, driven by gasoline, track the world gasoline price. But as you can see from the chart on the left-hand side, if we look at this circled area here on the chart, the gasoline A price, that's the Brazil's gasoline price, did not follow the US Gulf gasoline price during the period when oil prices went very high. In other words, Petrobras didn't pass on the very high oil prices to consumers in order to keep fuel prices under control. On top of that, we've seen tax cuts on fuel also moderate the influence of very high oil prices on sugar. Another way of looking at what's happened to the number 11 is to see what's happened to it in relation to its two key benchmark prices. Those are ethanol parity in Brazil, i.e. the price you need to encourage millers to produce sugar rather than ethanol. And secondly, India's export price, i.e. the price that's needed to get Indian millers to be interested to export sugar to the world market rather than sell domestically. If you look at what's happened to the number 11, shown in orange here, normally ethanol parity is the dominant reference point for the world sugar market because of the importance of Brazil. But actually over the last year or so, ethanol parity hasn't been as important as it has been in the past. If we look at the situation in sort of April, May, ethanol parity went very high, but sugar didn't follow it. Equally, most recently, ethanol parity has gone very low, down to sort of 14, 15 cents. But again, sugar prices haven't followed it. Instead, sugar has tracked quite closely India's export price. And that really reflects the fact that poor crops in Brazil over the last year, and also reduced availability from Thailand, normally the #2 exporter in the world, has increased the market's need for Indian sugar, and has meant that ultimately the world sugar market has had to pay for that sugar. And that's meant that prices have had to trade at or close to India's break-even price in this sort of 18 to 20 cents per pound range. On the other hand, though, the sheer scale of export availability from India during this period far exceeded expectations, and effectively kept a lid on prices and prevented them from rising much above this. The result is that we've seen sugar prices stay within this fairly narrow 17 to 20 cents per pound range most of the time. So where do we go from here? Well, if we look at our global supply-demand balance for 2022-23, our current forecast is for a production surplus of around 3 to 4 million tonnes. That's at current prices. So that assumes that Brazil continues to maximize sugar for the remainder of this crop, but also in its production in 2023. But as always, there's big questions over over any global balance. And these are some of the issues that I want to talk about in the second part of my presentation. So first one, Brazil. What will final production be in 22-23, and what are the prospects for next year? Thailand, how much will the crop recover? Pakistan, what do the floods mean for this year's crop? Europe, how badly has the crop been affected by very dry weather? And finally, India's export policy, how will it affect the flow of exports out of India and influence the global trade balance? We start with Brazil. In terms of the crop, we're expecting a cane crop somewhere in the region of 545 million tonnes in the centre south. So that's larger than last year, which was only around 525, but it's well below its normal capacity, which is in excess of 600 million tonnes. Looking ahead to next year, if we assume that we're going to get normal summer rains, it's a big question mark because we still have La Nina weather pattern influencing the situation in the centre south. But assuming normal summer rains, we should expect the crop to rebound further in 23-24, probably to somewhere in the region of 580 million tonnes is our current best guess, but that's all it is at this stage. In terms of sugar production, ethanol parity is currently low, 14, 15 cents per pound. So it means that centre-south Brazilian millers are producing as much sugar as they can. We think that final production might be in the region of 33 million tonnes by the end of the season. So points to watch in particular are rains in September and in Q4. While those rains will be good news for next year's crop recovery, they could reduce the amount of sugar that Brazil is able to produce in the current crop and influence the need for Indian sugar in Q1 next year. Another country where we're seeing production gradually recover is Thailand. If we look at production last year, millers crushed around 90 million tonnes of cane in 21-22, and we expect the crop to increase further in 22-23 to probably in the region of 110 million tonnes of cane. That would give sugar production a little under 12 million tonnes, roughly 2 million tonnes more than last year. and would mean that from an export perspective, that export capacity will increase, not back to the peaks when Thailand's crop was very large in 2017-18 and 18-19, but getting back towards those levels. So we should see an increase in supply from Thailand. Another country where exports are likely to increase is Pakistan. Now, the prospects for the 22-23 crop have obviously been thrown into doubt by the severe flooding that the country has suffered from over the last few weeks. But based on what we know today, they still look likely to produce a surplus. And equally, if we look at at last year's crop, there's surplus sugar that could be exported from that crop as well. It's waiting for government approvals. Currently, exports are in the country are banned, but a new export tonnage is currently being considered. So from an Indian perspective, that's important because a likely destination for Pakistan exports will be Afghanistan, which would displace Indian sugar. If we look at if the chart on the right-hand side shows that India has been the dominant supplier of Afghanistan over the last couple of years. That could start to change with more competition from Pakistan. So far, the story is perhaps is a mixed one from an Indian perspective. Perhaps some better news comes from the EU, where we see a growing deficit. In the EU area, that's planted to beet has contracted by around 4% due to strong competition from alternative crops, and yields are also being hit by the very hot, very dry weather that Europe experienced over the summer. So in short, it means that the EU's import requirement is going to increase, and it means that export availability is going to decrease. So less EU white sugar being available in the coming season. In Ukraine, for obvious reasons, area has fallen back this year. It's around 20% down, but of course consumption is also going to be lower. So there should be some surplus stock, some of which we think may get exported to the EU, where prices are currently extremely high. Finally, there's stronger results in Russia, where a return to surplus is expected, and that surplus is likely to be sold into Central Asia, where a lot of those markets have become tight due to the Russia-Ukraine war. So on the production side, there's a mixed story from an Indian perspective. But one positive is that demand has remained very strong. Demand has been led by a very strong white sugar market, and we've seen sky-high white premiums result in very strong demand for raw sugar from refiners. We can see that from the chart on the left, shows the lineup of vessels in Centre-South Brazil exporting raw sugar. If you look at the green line that shows the evolution for this year, you can see that it's the highest that it's been over the last 5 years at this point in the crop year. Similarly, you can see it when you look at the cash premiums that are offered for Brazilian sugar. Normally, Brazilian sugar trades at a discount versus October futures. This year, however, we're seeing cash premiums rise to a premium. So basically highlights the point that despite India exporting 11 million tons, the market seems to have managed to absorb that sugar fairly well and still be willing to pay premiums for Brazilian sugar. So it's highlighting that demand has been bouncing back. And this brings me to the key point really, which is that the market still needs Indian sugar to balance trade flows. Even with Central South Brazil producing 33 million tonnes, Thailand producing 2 million tonnes more, we think the market still needs Indian sugar to bridge the supply gap to the next Brazilian crop. And you can see that from the chart on the left-hand side, which shows our trade balance with and without Indian exports. It shows that before Brazil's crop gets going in Q2, I think the market needs at least 4 million tonnes of Indian sugar. Now, based on expectations about the export policy, that sugar should be available, but we also have to remember that India will have maybe 3 or 4 million tonnes less sugar to export than it had in 21-22, and the flow could be more restricted by policy, which we don't yet know the details of. So the tonnage and the type of export policy that India adopts is going to be a key influence on the market in the coming months. So my final slide, I just want to return to this idea of where sugar is likely to trade in relation to its two key benchmarks, India's break-even price and the ethanol parity. And ultimately pose the question, will the market have to chase Indian sugar, or in the end, will it have to be Indian millers who end up chasing the market? Our view is that the market's need for Indian sugar will ultimately be supportive, even if prices don't necessarily match the domestic market all of the time. And that's going to particularly offer support if there are any delays to announcing the export policy, or if the policy is more cautious, either in terms of the tonnage or the mechanism that's used to allow exports to come out of the country. On the upside, of course, if we have weather problems elsewhere, or if we see reduced fertilizer use have a bigger impact on yields than expected, then it could yet push us through the ceiling that's been created by India's export price. But we also need to be aware that ethanol parity is now much lower than it was at this time last year. So if the market decides that there is enough Indian sugar, there is enough supply there to bridge the gap through to the next Brazilian crop, then there's more downside risk now than there was at this time last year. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Again, I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but I wish you all the best for a fantastic conference and some great discussions. Thank you very much.